Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Jim, good to see you.
Matt, it's great to see you again. First time, I think I first met you in 87,
Yeah.
88 at Citizens for a Sound Economy when you were young and wholesome.
Yeah, and you had red hair at that time.
I was prematurely bald, but yeah, the hair was red, and I was still working on my rustic image.
Yeah.
I didn't quite have it down yet.
Yeah, we were in a bunker cubicle sort of situation. Perhaps one of the few places where libertarians felt safe in the belly of the beast, maybe.
Was that over in L'Enfant Plaza?
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, it's hard to imagine being safe in the shadow of the Postal Service headquarters.
Well, we're even closer to the Capitol now, so we'll see if we get disrupted by jackbooted thugs as we talk.
Well, since it's not 5 a.m., I assume that they're not going to come in.
Yeah,
but the flashbangs, you got to watch out for them.
Yeah. So we were talking before we started about you being chased by the Stasi. Why would they do that to you? I thought they were the good guys.
Nowadays they are in the narrative that's going. The Stasi was the East German secret police. And I went behind the Iron Curtain probably half a dozen, 8 or 9 times, doing investigations, articles for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Reader's Digest. And in order to save paperwork, I would just go in with a tourist visa. And however, and I was, most of the time I had no trouble, but there was once I was coming from Prague, going to Dresden, and I got caught at the East German-Czech border. And the East German military guards went through my car very closely and found some German papers that I never expected them to find. And so they seized my passport, they marched me off for interrogation. For 3 hours, I was interrogated by 3 different officers, and so I had to lie my ass off in both English and German. And so it was good I had practice here in the U.S. dealing with police before that. So you just sit there and you just kind of hoping that you can talk your way out of it. And they seized all the papers I had that they found. But I was doing an investigation of the environmental collapse of the East Bloc, and and the key notes I had was a small little notebook that I had hidden inside of my underwear. And the police and the guards did not do a strip search, so I was able to get away. But then I went further into East Germany, and then a day or 2 later, I'm leaving the country. But the Czech rent-a-car I had broken down. I'd abandoned it at the Dresden train station. So I was coming into East Berlin and the border station there, and the border chief asked me the Hochdeutsch equivalent, "Dude, where's your car?"
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a dicey thing. I was saved by Hogan's Heroes, having watched Hogan's Heroes in my formative years. So I'm talking to this guy in German, and I explained to him that the Czech rent-a-car people were a bunch of Schweinhund. And his eyes lit up, because I think that term had gone out of use in German, but it was big with Hogan Heroes. Everybody was a Schweinhund. And so he said, "Oh, okay." So, and then he let me go. So, but the thing that ties in that made me think of you was one of my favorite couplet, whatever line from the Grateful Dead, "Friend of the Devil." The sheriff is on my trail. If he catches up with me, I'll spend my life in jail.
Yeah. You sent me, in preparation for this article, a piece that you'd written about the Grateful Dead, probably around 94, 95, I think it was.
30 years ago, March 15th, 1994, Newsday, New York.
Yeah, and I wore my Jerry shirt.
Oh, that's great.
In your honor, and I will gift you one because you need this. Because Jerry said, constantly choosing the lesser of 2 evils is still choosing evil.
That's great. That's great. That's a great motto for your activism in politics.
Yeah.
Because it's such a damn hard fight, and it's funny to think back to what the situation was when you and I first met in the late 80s. That was like a golden era of American freedom by comparison.
Yeah. And perhaps I at least feel like I was wildly naive in thinking that I could influence the process in a way that would defend basic constitutional rights and limit the size and scope of government and rein in the administrative class. We're all like kind of optimistic about that stuff in the 80s and the 90s. at least relative to today.
Yep.
And then I read your new book, and I'm totally black-pilled now.
Oh, black-pilled. Oh dear. Well, yeah. People say that my work is hell on positive thinking.
Yeah.
But I mean, devil's advocate point. If you look at some of the folks who you helped get into Congress, like Massie and Mike Lee, I mean, those are folks who are leaders.
Rand Paul. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are three of the best people on Capitol Hill, and their first election was thanks in part to you, right?
Yes. We were intimately involved in that. Back, the Ron Paul movement sort of morphed into the early Tea Party days, and I think all of these guys would have some sort of story about thinking for the first time in their lives that they could win.
Yeah.
Which wasn't a thing like, when we first met, I think Ron Paul was probably in office then.
He was in office from, I think, 76 to 84. And he ran for Senate in Texas and came in third in the GOP primary. So he was out for about a dozen years.
And then he came back for a while.
Came back for about late 96 to 2012.
So I guess he wasn't in office then. So there, like the idea that you could have a Thomas Massie or a Rand Paul or a Mike Lee, particularly in the Senate, that would have been a unicorn back then. We were always working at the margins trying to find someone that cared at least about some of our constitutional rights.
Yeah, but it was hard to rely on Jesse Helms.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a laugh line, but some jokes don't work. No, Helms was good on a few issues, but he was, anyhow.
I always use Jesse Helms, and maybe some viewers don't even know who that is, but I always use Jesse Helms to argue with my art friends who were adamant that the government should fund the arts. And I'm like, do you really want Jesse Helms choosing the art czar so that the government can determine what is legitimate art and what is not? Because that's what you're advocating.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. So, I mean, he was very attached to tobacco.
Yeah.
So, maybe I was going to say his downfall, but I guess he survived long enough. He didn't have a downfall. So.
Yeah. But back to the Grateful Dead, because this you reminded me of this story, and I'm obviously a huge Deadhead, and I've talked about the Dead, and I view the Grateful Dead parking lot scene, which was this spontaneously emerging market order. Deadheads would follow the Grateful Dead around, and this was a lifestyle. This wasn't just a music scene. So they would earn their living selling tie-dyed T-shirts, selling grilled cheese sandwiches, and probably on occasion selling illegal drugs.
Really?
It's a myth. I've been told by friends that it's true.
Oh.
But it was like the thing I loved about the Dead was not just this community scene, but the fact that they very much respected each other's rights. They took care of the community. They respected the community, and in this process, the feds decided that these guys were sitting ducks to target for drug offenses.
Okay.
And
for stings.
Yeah, stings, yeah. And it's probably easy picking because these are just beautiful hippie people, right? And they would go in and they'd set them up and they'd arrest them, and they in very many ways in 94, 95 in particular, they completely disrupted the scene. And you wrote a piece about that.
Yeah, and there were so many levels of BS what the feds were doing, because a number of people, not all of them, who would go to the Dead concerts would purchase LSD and sugar cubes. And there were all these mandatory minimums, and what the feds would do would base the sentencing on the weight of the sugar, not on the drugs.
Yeah.
And I think it was Justice Scalia who said that was as stupid as basing the sentence on the weight of the defendant. So, but, it's just, it was sad to see that the media was so apathetic about that their because the Deadheads were persecuted.
Yeah.
They were, there was no heavy violence element to their fans, but the DEA wanted to crush them. So,
Free the People is embarking on our most ambitious project to date to document and expose the lies behind the greatest public health failure in my lifetime. We're talking to insiders with firsthand knowledge of the government's role in funding, creating, and then covering up the COVID-19 virus in our exclusive new documentary series, The Cover-Up. But I need your help. We won't get to the bottom of this scandal alone, so I'm asking viewers to crowdsource any information that could be helpful to our investigation. If you're watching this, you already know What the government did during lockdowns was unforgivable. Help us get to the truth and prevent it from ever happening again. To get involved, go to freethepeople.org/coverup. That's freethepeople.org/coverup. The truth is out there. I wonder, I don't know how syndicated that article was or if it just showed up in one place, because the very last Dead show I saw was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And there was an article, and Terry, my wife, she grew up in Pittsburgh. Terry's mom was still alive.
Oh, really? Okay.
Terry's mom.
Great place. That's where my folks were from. So.
Okay. So you get the Pittsburgh scene. Mom at the time is a very conservative Catholic Pittsburgher. And she's always been wondering, like, why do we go to all these Dead concerts, and what are these hippies all about? But she read some article about the feds going after these deadheads, and she says to Terry, why is the government picking on these poor deadheads? Why don't they just leave them alone? And I'm like, yes. Wow. Okay. She gets it.
That's great.
And she wouldn't otherwise in any way be sort of particularly empathetic to a bunch of tie-dyed hippies, but that kernel of love for liberty is your assertion is that it's in all of us Americans, that we have to somehow rediscover that, reignite it, because everything, as you said, since the 1980s, it feels like the government has criminalized everything, and whether, I guess we're not allowed to call it the deep state anymore because that's a Trump term, but the administrative state, the expansive bureaucracy that's unfireable, unaccountable, undocumented in almost every way, that they now own and control our lives.
Well, and the federal government is committing more crimes than we'll ever know, because the iron curtain of secrecy that's descended, the number of federal secrets are probably 10 times more than there were in the 1990s. The feds classify trillions of pages of documents each year, and anybody who exposes one of those documents without approval is treated like a heretic who's subverting democracy. And because of that, you and I have, well, I assume that, neither of us have much an idea what the U.S. government is doing in foreign policy. In Ukraine, the Middle East, Syria, other places, there is just, there are occasional leaks. Well, there was one person who told us what was going on, and he just got sentenced to prison for 16 years.
Yeah.
The airman, National Guard airman from Massachusetts. And it's just, there was no backlash from the media on that. It's like, okay, here's someone who put documents online. I don't know if he intended to leak them or not, but showed that what the Pentagon, the State Department, and the White House were saying was complete crap. But it didn't matter because, well, he's someone who violated the rules. It's like the rules make a mockery of self-government. But self-government at this point is simply paying, obeying, and wearing a federal blindfold.
Yeah. So, and we have politicians, and we'll pick on Biden and the Democrats for now, but we will certainly get into Republicans. But they mouth with almost a religious fervor the word democracy. And of course, democracy to them apparently means wanting to cage, persecute, and potentially execute guys like Julian Assange who out their unconstitutional behavior. Well, it doesn't feel like democracy.
Yeah, I mean, what Julian Assange did was expose a vast number of federal crimes, a lot of U.S. government killings in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, killings of innocent civilians. I did a piece for USA Today in 2018 saying that instead of an indictment, Julian Assange should get a Presidential Medal of Freedom. But, folks got the wrong impression that I had respect for those medals.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's a figure of speech.
It was good rhetoric. It was good rhetoric. And that's how I feel about Julian Assange. I mean, I've written about him quite a few times. I spoke at a rally for him late 2020 at the Justice Department. It's heart-wrenching to see someone who did heroic work and stood on principle and being vilified and abandoned. I'm glad some of the press groups are coming to his support, but it was pathetic to see Obama go after him. Then Trump made it a hell of a lot worse. Now Biden is consecrating Trump's abuses. So some days I almost get cynical.
Yeah. Thomas Massie, a shout out to him. He is, I don't know if you saw this, but he has invited Julian Assange's brother to sit in the galley for the State of the Union. Another greatest of all time move. But this gets into your new book. We should shamelessly plug it straight up front. Last Rites, The Death of American Liberty. Julian Assange, for people that haven't dug into it, he's a journalist.
Yep.
And he's a watchdog.
Yep.
And he's doing the work that corporate journalists supposedly do, were supposed to do, used to do maybe. And if you believe in any semblance of democracy, which is government from the people, in my mind, it's not the vulgar version of 50 plus 1 get to do whatever they want to the other 49%. It's hard to get traction on things like this because people aren't paying attention, they don't care. But if they succeed in basically killing Julian Assange, how many journalists are going to step up?
Oh, 3 or 4 at least.
Yeah, and you're one of them, and you're not looking as young as when I met you.
Well, I finally cut back on the cigars, but it's frustrating. Julian Assange had a number of great quotes, one of which, if wars can be started by lies, wars can be stopped with the truth. And that's one of his lodestars.
Yeah.
And he's, folks talk about self-government, but, self-government except for foreign policy, which we know nothing about almost, except for defense policy, which we know very little about. And you have all these members, all these activists and some members of Congress who were saying, well, it's important to fight here, here, and here. And in order to do that, we'll probably need a military draft. And I'm thinking that's going to bring back the Grateful Dead songs and a lot of the other protest songs of the 60s and 70s. It's like in their dreams. Yeah. I would hope people would not comply with that. But, I hope the same people had the same hope in 1917 and it didn't stick. So
I think we talk about Ross Ulbricht a lot on this show, and I've had his mom on the show.
Great.
But it's important for people to put this in a broader context. This isn't really about Julian Assange. This is about citizen journalism that's been empowered by all of these technologies that have liberated us from the tyranny of Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There was in 1965, there was an assistant secretary of defense by the name of Sylvester who taunted the press corps in Vietnam and Saigon at a press briefing, saying, just scoffing at them, that they were idiots to think that the government was going to tell them the truth and the government would control their story through their editors. And he just laughed at any idea that the government had to be honest. And it's, I think, one of the 60 Minutes guys, Murray, anyhow, I've forgotten the name of the guy, but he was there and wrote about it afterwards. But, I mean, that was, okay, so the government tells you this. The government says, we're going to be lying to you. And then most of the media just says, well, the government said, and I'm just thinking, for the love of goodness. I mean, think of the economic stories that you've looked at, the policies you've looked at, that I've looked at. I mean, so often you just unravel them, and it's an onion layer of lies and false numbers and false claims, and and you go down 10 steps, and the final step is the purple cow jumped over the moon, and then the program worked. Yeah. And it's like, but the government keeps shoveling that BS. People keep buying it, and now you've got Biden who's going to give a speech telling us the real trouble with America's shrinkflation. So
he's going to pinch his next election on the fact that there are a dozen fewer Doritos in your bag when you go to the store. And I'm like, I wonder if they are self-aware that they have had such a profound hand in inflating our currency to worthlessness. That
do they care?
Do they care?
They don't care. I mean, almost all of them have either got COLAs, guaranteed increases from inflation, or they've got huge sweetheart deals with lobbyists or contractors, or that's going to be waiting for them. I mean, these are folks who are immune to the damage they inflict on average Americans. Yeah. And this is one of the great tragedies. If you think of the federal policies, from 2000, well, from 9/11 onwards, first the government wrecked civil liberties, and then it wrecked the housing market, Fannie Mae and Freddie, and then you've got Obama coming in with his quantitative easing and zero interest rates, so you help wreck the middle class. And the idiocy of trying to inflate asset values to make the rich richer at the same time you're a liberal Democrat. Some people called him out on that, but damn few.
Yeah.
So
I don't think this is going to work for Biden, and we'll see, because I think people now have sort of an instinctual understanding that they've basically literally been robbed by Fed policy.
I hope you're right. I mean, that was one thing that Ron Paul was going back in the 1970s. He was the clarion call, I guess I should say that, always warning on that. And it's like, it's amazing to see how much damage the Federal Reserve has done. So
who knew that end the Fed could be an effective political rally cry? You have to be excited about that.
Yeah, there was a photo I took of a Ron Paul rally on Capitol Hill in 2007, and it was all these wholesome-looking college students holding a banner up that said "Kill the central bank."
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, well, that's I haven't seen that in Washington before. Certainly not on Capitol Hill. So, but I mean, if that message gets traction, that's great.
Well, we do have one elected official, Javier Milei, who actually believes that. He has a dog named after Murray Rothbard, another named after Milton Friedman, and he wants to end the central bank and dollarize the worthless Argentinian peso. So there's something happening that maybe we cannot be black-pilled about. Maybe we should be white-pilled about these little kernels that are starting to sprout.
There are kernels that are sprouting, but there's also a toxic cloud that covers a lot of the political landscape. And it's interesting. I did a story a couple of days ago for New York Post on Merle Haggard, because Merle Haggard did a song in 1982 asking if the best of the free life is behind us. And, he was laying out the thing, well, the government lied, the government dragged us into war, the currency's getting shot to hell, but the best days are ahead of us, I think. But then by the time he died, he was saying he was horrified. He had a wonderful line. He said that he had more freedom as a ex-convict on parole in 1960 than the average American had nowadays. And, Merle Haggard is not a, leftist pinko. I mean, he probably wasn't a deadhead, but don't hold that against him. But
the dead covered Merle Haggard, and that's all that matters. Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, well, hey.
I want to get this right because I'll be called out, but isn't Mama Tried a Merle Haggard song?
Oh, it's a wonderful song. That's the lyric I always sing when I'm waiting in line at TSA.
Yeah.
It makes him nervous.
Yeah.
It makes him really nervous.
So I want to get into the book and dig into your thesis on this, but I think it should be we're talking about Assange, and I mentioned Ross Ulbricht, whose crime, and he's got, I forget what the number is, but like multiple life sentences for the crime of creating a website that was a blockchain cryptocurrency driven marketplace.
Uh-huh.
So outside of the government regulated and prohibited system. And I think the reason that they are persecuting him so, and same with Edward Snowden for different reasons, is that the feds are wildly afraid that we're going to figure out what's going on. And we have new tools to figure out what's going on. And we also have new technologies that allow us to opt out of the fiat government regulated, government controlled system through crypto technology. This surge of freedom is why they're coming down so hard on these guys, and probably coming down hard on all of the things that we might be optimistic about, because they're scared shitless. This is a good thing.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I hope that those things can get more traction. I hope more people will pay attention to the facts that are out there. I mean, there was a survey recently that showed almost 30% of young Americans in their 20s would approve of government mandating surveillance cameras in their own homes in order to prevent domestic violence. And I'm thinking, okay, these folks are lost.
Yeah,
These folks are just completely lost.
That's creepy.
Well, it's worse than creepy because it's these, I think something you and I might have had part of the reason that, you like the Grateful Dead is that there's a recognition that government is often a scoundrel and that politicians as a class should probably be mostly tarred and feathered. Whereas a lot of younger folks have got this kind of, like it's some kind of, some kind of bearer of gifts and free loans and this and that and free food, and it's going to take care of you because, it's almost like they think that's part of the government's DNA.
Yeah. We were just looking at polling that shows that I think the number was somewhere between 30 and 40% of young people, Americans between 18 and 25, think that socialism is better than capitalism.
Yep.
And we've all seen these scare polls, but I've now seen enough of them, and I've seen it from credible polling. And I think a benchmark, and you write about this in your book, and this has been an obsession of mine. A sea change happened with COVID and the government response to it, the lockdowns in particular. I think in a lot of ways, all of these faceless, gray-suited Soviets that work at these alphabet agencies have figured out our Achilles heel, and it's safety. It's particularly young people. They want to be safe. They want to be protected. They want to know that somebody smarter than them is in charge and has a plan on how to fix things. Because I was completely black-pilled by the realization that these constitutional rights that we've defended all of our lives are this document that we revere is completely leaky when it comes to an emergency. And you had tyrants, you had governors, you had presidents, you had bureaucrats that we had never heard of, like Anthony Fauci, suddenly dictating every aspect of our lives. How did that happen?
Government was stampeded people with fear. But the biggest lesson of the pandemic is that there's more to fear from politicians than from a virus, because the ease with which they completely destroyed freedom, and it was Trump and Biden and most of the governors, and to see the type of arguments that people would swallow, and just to kind of, I don't know if it's partly a therapeutic culture mindset, but you figure out where the fear is and you push those buttons, and all of a sudden you have people, I'm a hike leader, and the groups that I was lead hikes with kept hiking throughout the pandemic, and we'd be out walking along C&O Canal towpath, and we're outside. I'm not going to be wearing a mask. I literally had people screaming at me because I wasn't wearing a mask, and I had a simple response: tell it to your therapist.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're outside. I mean, and just the rage. And there was a Harris Teeter near where I live, where I go to, and they had two separate entrances, but the county health department said you had to make one an exit, one the entrance. Well, I've always used the one that was designated an exit. And I said, well, I'm going to keep doing that. There was this big old guy, government worker, off on furlough or getting paid to work from home, and he's coming out with a shopping cart. He sees me trying to come in, and he panics. He simply panics. You can't come in. I said, well, yeah, I always come in here. No, it's the rule. See, that's the rule. I said, yeah, and okay, so that's the rule. And he kept shouting at me. So I finally said, are you a bootlicker? And he said, I'm not a bootlicker, but you sound like the kind of people that did January the 6th. And so I just kind of stood there waiting for him to move on, and he was snarling at me, and I'm thinking, okay, one more asshole, check the list off. So
at Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love liberty and look cool.
So masks, January 6th, Ukraine flags in your bio. There is this comprehensive religion that's sort of emerged, and
virtue signaling.
Yeah.
It was amazing how the mask almost overnight became virtue signaling. And the only Governor Hogan, I live in Maryland, mandated for going to grocery stores. So I think the only selfie I ever took was me with my railroad engineer cap and my face mask and a cigar sticking out and the smoke coming out of the cigar, because that was what it was worth.
Yeah.
I mean, and just to see how they were, the whole purpose of the mask mandate was to curb the transmission of anxiety, because it sure as hell didn't stop the virus. Most people didn't wear them right. Most people were wearing cloth masks, and it's like, the cloth masks are not worth toilet paper. So, but it was sad to see how easily vilified people that were doubted the system was. I mean, I wrote, I was criticizing the lockdowns and the mandates from, March, April 2020, and I got attacked a lot, but there were a few places that, were open their door. USA Today was good as long as they had a couple of good people at the editorial page. So,
name some of the publications that were willing to offer that dissident view on lockdowns. USA Today, you just mentioned.
USA Today I was able to get some things in New York Post, to a degree. American Institute for Economic Research was very good.
Yeah.
Jeff Tucker was the editor there at that point. Tucker later started Brownstone Institute. Brownstone has done some excellent work on COVID and warning of the lasting lessons from the pandemic. I'm supposed to list other places, right?
No. Well,
there were some think tanks. Massie's Institute was good. Future Freedom Foundation was good.
Well, you're a journalist, and most of the places that you just listed are not necessarily journalistic platforms, although the definition of that will change.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
Jeffrey is a publisher. Free the People, we publish articles, and we certainly ended up publishing a lot of anti-lockdown, anti-mask, whatever, like all of these anti-authoritarian things during lockdowns. And I suspect that the reason that we publish them all, we crowdsource these articles.
Okay.
And I suspect that almost every author was turned down by a corporate press outlet where they would have normally done that. So I'm more encouraged that you could name two. So
no, I mean, but it's well, don't be encouraged, because there was a lot of strikeouts. And, but the interesting thing was, it was a similar experience to me that I had after 9/11, because I don't know if you recall, but after 9/11, I didn't change my principles, but a huge number of Washington D.C. libertarians did. They went over to the other side of the barricades.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman who made a speech, and the House Majority Leader made a speech in favor of the Patriot Act, where he said, you should be proud to vote for this. This is one of your finest moments. The government's going to make us secure. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a great speech. I'll never forget it. So
I'm now realizing that you probably rubbed off on me when we were hanging out back in the 1980s, because one of my first forays into foreign policy was opposing government involvement in the war in Kuwait.
Oh, that's great.
And
that's great.
I've never told this story publicly before, but the then editor of Reason turned down that article, and I had to publish it in Liberty Magazine. So very early on I realized, maybe we're not as principled non-interventionists as we think we are.
Well, it's a question of who we is. It's like the old Kemosabe joke. The Reason has some excellent people. They've had some excellent editors. I mean, but some of the trade stuff I was pushing there in the early 90s, there was one, I got one of my favorite rejects from the then editor, and she said, this is not up to our standards. And so I flipped the story and sold it to the New York Times.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, yeah, okay, fine, honey.
Yeah. That's funny. So another, to put a point on this, I'm going to keep vacillating, because as I do every day in my real life, between being white-pilled and black-pilled, because if you make me, I will come up with a very optimistic prognosis for liberty in this country.
So is that what white-pilled means, being optimist?
Yes.
Okay.
And black-pilled means we're fucked.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
And you appreciate this vacillation. You must go through this every day yourself.
I don't go through it so much like that. It's more like, I think of it as a battle line. And, I'm still fighting for the same things that I fought for decades. There was one of my favorite New York Times headlines was from 1995, and I cut it out and put it taped it to my office wall, and it said, "For the Chechens in the mountains, fighting is winning." And that's my idea of fighting for freedom.
Yeah.
Because as long as we're still fighting, then we're winning, or at least, I mean, some of the stuff that you're doing is sowing the seeds with new generations that folks, hopefully some of those folks will rise up and become, heroes of liberty. So
you still have the right to fight and the right to speak and the right to dissent, and that to me is the American ethos.
I agree. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we still have it on paper. I mean, but if you got the FBI and the Biden White House yanking the chains on Twitter,
yeah,
and yanking and shutting down Facebook, and going back to my second grade, I've always been a smart ass, and I would make sarcastic comments online, and I'm sure some of them said, "Well, this sounds like trouble." So, but
you're definitely on a list. I have no doubt about that.
In 2015, the Justice Department was pressuring USA Today to stop publishing me, and I got the emails on that and had a fun story with that. But FBI chief has publicly condemned me. A lot of other places have too. So, how I've suffered.
But we were talking about the places that you publish these dissident views against lockdowns, and I noticed that the AIER and Brownstone and all these other places. I mean, you were still allowed to go on Joe Rogan and ask these questions, even though they tried to cancel him on Spotify. And I think that this hysterical overreaction, this granular censorship that we discovered when Elon Musk released the X files, Twitter files back then, that tells me that the feds are desperate. Like they don't know what to do with this decentralized, democratized journalism that's happening today. Because I think some of the top sleuths uncovering what is now should be an obvious fact that there was a lab leak in Wuhan, and that this was a government manipulated, funded by Fauci super virus. These things were heretical, and you would literally get banned from Twitter and Facebook
you were
and
racist.
YouTube. Yeah,
that was a label. That was one of the things that fascinated me early in the COVID chapter in the last rites was that. They were able to suppress the lab leak truth. I mean, the high probability of the lab leak, but it wasn't just Fauci and the government contractors avoiding liability. If people had realized that this pandemic was a result of the biggest government screw-up in modern history, then people would not say, well, then it makes no sense to expect the government to save us.
Yeah.
I mean, government was, there's a term for the type of angel, not just avenging angel, but government was like the ultimate angel during COVID, and a lot of people put all their hope and faith in it, and hated people who didn't, as you might recall.
Mm-hmm.
But if folks had realized, well, wait a minute, this was a federal fuck up, and the government lied to us, and you had even the Obama administration saying, hey, this is a really bad idea, and then Fauci goes around and does it anyhow. But there's a lot of folks I know that still talk about Fauci like he's a saint.
Yeah, so. I never bought one because I couldn't encourage this kind of market behavior. But you could buy Fauci prayer candles.
Yep. Yeah.
And there was a religiosity to it.
Well, but it was the same thing with Robert Mueller, the special counsel who was going after Trump. And I have memories. I was out in San Francisco on the day that he finally testified before Congress, and it was kind of a cheap hotel. And I had a hard time getting the damn TV working, but it finally came in. And then so I'm watching this guy, and this guy who had all these votary candles, either one, the candles dedicated to him, and he's just what. And it's just like, okay, so it was all bullshit the last 2 years, and they knew it was bullshit, and it kept going, and it allowed the Democrats to capture control of Congress, and there were so many profound corruptions in that scandal. It doesn't make Trump an honest man. It doesn't make Trump trustworthy, but to see the level of deceit and machinations. And to see what they did in 2000, you were talking earlier about democracy. I mean, I've had fun with the notion of will of the people because Biden loves to throw that phrase out. I mean, it sounds better than ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. But I mean, that is practically what it's going towards when you say, well, I had more votes on this day. I mean, well, in this 2-month period with the mail-in stuff. And then that the whole notion that he would have people were obliged to defer. And that's, as you said, that was a version of democracy. I think Thomas Jefferson, it was not an elective despotism that we fought for.
Right.
But this is what we've had, and it's becoming a whole lot worse. And it's frustrating to me to be looking at the 2024 race, and lots of sparks, lots of smoke. Is anybody talking about freedom? I mean, it's a non-issue. There was Henry Adams, a historian 100 years ago, had a great line: politics has always been about the systematic organization of hatreds. And this is what we're seeing in this year. I mean, it's understandable that Trump folks would hate back, because with the way they've been vilified, it's appalling.
There is this, and let's pick on, we've been picking on Democrats a lot. Let's pick on Republicans and conservatives, and that word is so misused. I'm not sure what it means anymore, but I'm talking about this rising of national conservatism, which is basically, we're not going to talk about defending constitutional rights anymore. We're not going to talk about individual freedom. We're not going to talk about free enterprise. We're going to talk about seizing the reins of power so that we can do to them what they did to us.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing more and more in this cycle.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's mortifying, because it's like, I'm totally opposed to the violation of constitutional rights by either party and any administration. But the whole idea that the Trump supporters should be able to get power to punish the Democrats, it's like, I mean, if somebody broke the law, I mean, if someone did something more serious than parading without a permit in the Capitol building, okay, fine, take a look at, prosecute the violent crimes. But there's, part of my frustration is I don't see that conservatives and Republicans have learned very much, aside from some of the folks you mentioned at the start: Massie, Rand Paul, Mike Lee's done some great work. One of the places I'm affiliated with is American Conservative. I've written for them almost since their start. They've done a lot of very good stuff on foreign policy and civil liberties, but they're part of the Tariff Salvation Show. Yeah. And I'm just like, where in the hell did this come from?
Did you know my friend John Utley?
Oh, he was, there was a line, not a line, but there was a comment I made about John Utley after he died. I said John was one of the few people in Washington who, if he asked you how you were doing, he gave a damn about your answer.
Right.
Because there was a goodness to him, and he was so rare.
Yeah. And he was sort of the passion behind the resurgence of the American conservative, and
he saved it.
And
he saved it at least once or twice or three times. So
yeah, and making it more libertarian. I do see the strains of national conservatism there.
It's I don't know if it's a strain or if it's a tidal wave at this point. I mean, there's some good folks there. I don't think they're going to ask me to write about trade.
No.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty, and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with BlazeTV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it.
So I want to ask about, I haven't spent much time on this show talking about this, and I'll give you some context. January 6th, and I happened to be scheduled to be on Glenn Beck's podcast in Dallas the day after.
Uh-huh.
And, very limited information. All you saw was, some images on the TV. And I looked at it as a former Tea Party organizer. And we spent an amazing amount of time, an inordinate amount of time, training activists in the principles of nonviolence, particularly as espoused by Martin Luther King and his wing of the civil rights movement, for very practical reasons. Well, first of all, we're not the violent ones. We're fighting against government violence. But more importantly, protesting is all about the narrative that comes out. What happens afterwards. And when I saw January 6th, based on whatever I was seeing that day, I said, okay, you guys blew it. You gave the left the narrative that they've wanted forever, which is we're violent, we're going to break windows, we're going to push people, all of this stuff. And I hadn't seen most of it at that point. And I do still think that that's true. Like when you see anyone misbehaving, you either tell them to get the hell out, and I've seen plenty of videos of that happening since, or you get out. And now, like, fast forward to all the great work that Thomas Massie has done. I don't think I got anything wrong that day, but I only knew a tiny fraction of the story.
Okay.
And I now think that a lot of these activists, particularly the ones walking through the velvet cords and touring the Capitol, essentially, that they were set up. What's your take? You've written a lot about this.
It's interesting. On the day of the January 6th, I've forgotten exactly what I tweeted, but I was watching Trump's speech before the ruckus. And, he had a few good lines. There was a lot of bullshit. I won by a landslide. And I'm thinking, like, in your dreams. I've written a lot about the 2020 election. There were so many changes in procedure that raised a lot of doubts, or basically, got a lot of votes that probably would not have been votes in the past. But I actually had a story that came out during that ruckus on January 6th by AIER. It was on how the Democrats were vastly expanding the notion of treason. And they had done that before January 6th. And Jeff Tucker, and so I sent him a note. I said, hey, where's the story? Well, okay, I guess I'll go live with it. But then I wrote for Billy Gribbin, or I think a Daily Caller a few days later. And then it was just, from the start, there were things about how it was being exploited. And then the cover photo for Last Rites is a photo that I took when the National Guard had occupied Capitol Hill, and they had the barbed wire up there.
That's 1 block from my house, by the way.
Yep. Wow.
You can't imagine. I had to show my papers to get back to my own house, if you want to understand what it was like here.
Well, and it was fascinating to me to see how easily that the politicians could stage a military takeover, and almost all the media said, well, it's going to keep us safe. It's like, Godfrey Daniels, there's troops in the street, there's all these armored vehicles. I was walking around doing photos, and I'm thinking, like, okay, I mean, I didn't attack the troops or anything like that, but I'm just thinking, okay, why are there no alarm bells going off? But maybe that's the whole issue, is that the alarm bells for tyranny no longer work, especially for educated Americans.
Yeah.
People with their second or third masters, or, it does work for hokey dropouts, but that's a different story.
Is there like a bell curve for education and stupidity? Like, after 2 masters, are you hopeless?
There's not a bell curve for education and stupidity, but there might be a bell curve for education and servility.
Yeah.
And that's what if you look at a lot of the polls, I'm just astounding to see that people who have a lot more higher education don't have the old-fashioned reflex. I was raised in the mountains of Virginia. People there instinctively didn't trust the government. And if government, there was a wonderful song, Rocky Top, that goes on about how the government agents went up the mountain, never came down. I mean, that was the ethos, and it's not
another jam band. Fish plays Rocky Top all the time.
Oh, does it? Okay.
You got to get it. You got to get into your jam bands. It's a safe passage for country
Fish.
fans.
Fish. I've heard about. I'm pretty sure that the Juggalos don't do Rocky Top, do they?
Probably not.
Okay. Yeah, it wouldn't fit their Detroit motif. No, it's just. As far as education, there is a sense of, one of the things I've tried to do with Last Rites, and it goes back to Lost Rights 30 years earlier, was to give people a vivid awareness that government is coercive. The government is not your friend, that you should not defer to it, and that it's not going to save your ass.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, there's a lesson of the need, the last paragraph in Lost Rights back in 94, the final quote was from Henry David Thoreau. And I think the quote was that if he knew for sure that someone was coming to do him a good deed, he'd run for his life.
Yeah.
And you got the entire government that's been doing that. And if there's a chapter in there in schools, and the schools gone wild. And if you look at what the schools are doing indoctrination-wise, in lieu of literacy, it's just like, okay, you're basically, it's a vision of justice to make people have contempt for their own bodies. And this is not going to have a happy ending, and it's not. So.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned in that chapter, more than mentioned, but this idea, if there's been an expansive definition of treason, there's also a expansion of the word terrorist to the point where it's meaningless now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, terrorism has been practically expanded to connote gun owners who distrust the government. I mean, that was basically what they had on Duncan Lemp, the guy that was killed 4 years ago next week in Montgomery County, Maryland. Government comes in, there was no threat of violence by him, but the government claimed he owned an assault weapon. They later admitted they were wrong. Well, it wasn't one, but we thought it was. We saw a picture online on his Instagram, and he'd made anti-police comments to confidential informants. So they go in, smash in his windows at 4:42 a.m., throw in flashbangs, shoot him 3 times. He's laying there bleeding to death on the floor. What do the cops do? They don't do first aid. Cop comes up, puts his boot on his throat as he's dying. I mean, and this is Montgomery County, Maryland. This isn't Baltimore City. And it's like, and they got away with it completely.
Is there any hope for justice in that case? I've read about it.
Yeah, I had an article last week in American Conservative on that. There is a wrongful death lawsuit. I mean, I'm hoping it will pry some information out. But Godfrey Daniels, I mean, we know almost nothing about what the police did. Almost all the memos were kept secret. There was a government report that came out, state's attorney's report, that basically said, yeah, well, well, it was a total whitewash, and it should have been embarrassing, but it was Montgomery County, so there was no problem, because it's fascinating to see how people were so liberal that they shrug off government killing, as long as the government killed someone who was libertarian-leaning gun owner and didn't fit the preferred victim narrative that year. So
yeah, everything's upside down, and it seems like the left has become more pro FBI, more pro CIA,
FBI is just
more
yes.
pro law enforcement generally, and I'm like, this is bizarre world.
Well, this ties into your comment on the connection between education and servility. Because, I mean, if you look at the breakdown on the polls of people with master's degrees, whatever, and trust in the FBI, and it's like, okay, so history was, history's been expunged. Because it used to be that it was the liberals, the leftists, who would have that gut instinct on the FBI. It's kind of like, okay, these are folks who are kind of sneaking around, and the law doesn't apply to them, and the courts let them do whatever they want. And if you look at the FISA stuff, I mean, the FBI admitted that they did wrongful, unjustified wiretaps on 3 million people, 3 million Americans, and the government and the courts say, well, okay, well, don't do it again.
Right. I was kind of hoping that the shenanigans, the anti-Trump shenanigans, particularly emanating out of the FBI, and now we're learning because of the Twitter files that all of these government agencies, particularly security agencies, either Homeland Security, the whole alphabet soup, that they're targeting conservatives, and they're targeting Republicans, and
Yep.
And I thought that might have been a wake-up call about this conservative trust. I mean, conservatives are schizophrenic, as most people are, and maybe I am too. But we know we don't trust government power. We know that government is inherently corrupted. We know that political incentives are shallow and self-serving as opposed to the public interest. but we still have sort of a blind, we being conservatives have a blind faith towards law enforcement and a blind faith in national defense. And I was kind of hoping that this whole Trump fiasco, Russian collusion thing would sort of wake them up and realize, you know what, government is most dangerous when it's doing something that you think is essential.
As Shakespeare said, hope is a curtailed dog in some affairs. Some Merry Wives of Windsor. I had the same hope, but it's just, it's like, it's almost like an O. Henry story, because he was sent to prison for being a grafter. And in prison, he heard all these great stories from con artists about how they do the circus shell games and how they would trick farmers with this and how they trick farmers with that. And it was almost like there was something in the farmer's DNA that they'd always come back and lose another hand. And it's the same with a lot of people in their attitude towards government power. I mean, one thing that astounds me with conservatives is that they're, the new faith in tariffs. I mean, these are folks who say, well, Washington's got too much power, DC's a swamp. But maybe the answer is to let the politicians fix all the prices in the country.
Right.
And it's like, and have a 10% surcharge on everything. And it's just like, so what I wonder is how many of these people are corrigible? How many of these people will ever figure it out? Because a lot of members of Congress, I did a story recently about the prayer breakfast, and the House Speaker was there, and how there were some news stories about how the House Speaker had said that, God had chosen or designated Biden for president. And I'm thinking, well, I never heard that in Presbyterian Sunday school. But it's just, I don't know what the cure is for making people less docile.
Yeah.
And that's something which you're working on. It's something which I've been working on to try to get the light bulb to go off. And so it doesn't matter who the president is. It wouldn't matter if it was Thomas Massie. Government would still not be trustworthy. It doesn't mean that you attack the government, but it just means that you safeguard your rights and liberties. But
one example where I think this is happening, and you reference this in the book, the education industrial complex took a trouncing during lockdowns because the lockdowners targeted children first, and they masked children first, and now they're pushing to vaccinate children. And there's no scientific, medical, epidemiological evidence that any of this ever made sense. But in the process of doing that and forcing kids into this very structured Zoom school thing, a lot of parents that had just assumed that the schools and the teachers and the government really cared about their kids were starting to see the curriculum. And they were starting, more important perhaps than the curriculum, they were seeing the regimentation of public government education, and it felt more like prison than actually sparking an excitement for learning amongst kids. So then they go to these school board meetings, and they challenge the education industrial complex to stop teaching that garbage in our schools, and they get
tagged
labeled
by the FBI as terrorists.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a wake-up call.
It's a wake-up call. How many people are going to stay awake?
There is, I don't know what the numbers are, but I realize
huge jump in homeschooling.
Yeah, people are migrating, and the hope is, and I'm trying to be optimistic. The hope is you create new institutional structures, informal institutional structures that make it safer and safer for more parents to take the jump who are otherwise intimidated by the idea of homeschooling. They think that homeschooling is a full-time job, but there's all sorts of emergent structures where parents are sharing the burden, or they're raising enough money together to hire a teacher. Provided that the education unions and the government allows them to do that, and they're obviously trying to stop that now.
Yeah, that's one of the most hopeful harvests of the pandemic and all the horrible policies which have done lasting damage to millions of kids. And you mentioned the vaccines. Biden is pushing for COVID vaccine boosters for children, for infants 6 months old.
Right.
Nowhere else in the world is any government even pushing anything like that. Most of the European governments have said the COVID vaccines are unnecessary and potentially harmful for children, and yet there's this, it's almost like that it's almost like some pagan religion that Biden is trying to uphold. I don't know how many shares of Pfizer he owns, but it's a really horrible thing. It'd be great to get a lot more kids out of the gravitational downward pull of government schools. I think back to my time in government schools, it was the most brain-numbing experience of my life. It was even worse than working for the Virginia Highway Department as a flagman. But basically, as soon as I graduated from high school, my love of reading came back.
Mm-hmm.
And that radically changed my life because I had a passion for ideas. Someone gave me a great books list. So I started reading philosophers and really good historians. And all of a sudden, there was a self-awareness and, to a degree, a lot more self-reliance mentally, as opposed to just reading what the government, stuck in front of you and spending 6 weeks on John Milton's Paradise Lost and thinking, damn, I'll never read another poem. But, I do.
I suspect you were as good of a student as I was, because I was ignoring school to the point where I got left behind because I just decided not to fill in the tests.
Wow.
But at the same time, I was reading a lot of books that I had discovered through a rock band called Rush.
Oh yeah, of course.
I know you know this story perhaps, and they one of their albums is dedicated to the genius of Ayn Rand. So I follow the breadcrumbs, find a copy of Anthem. Eventually, she says you need to read Ludwig von Mises if you want to understand economics, and I've self-curriculated outside of the school system, but I'm doing extremely poorly in the government system. And I didn't know that I was a libertarian at that time, but I was just like obstinate and stubborn and a horrible nightmare for my parents.
Well, it sounded like your mind woke up several years earlier than mine did. It's a great to be able to read and to appreciate good ideas in your mid-teens or whenever, or at any point in life.
Yeah.
Because there's a power to ideas that you never get if you're in government schools. Before
we can fix what's going on today, we have to understand what's happening. And the thing that I've always loved about your writing style, I'm going to do a shameless plug for your new book here.
Thank you.
But you are steeped in the ideas, but you are a journalist, so you make it quick and simple to understand very layered, complex problems of what the government's doing to us. I assume that Last Rites, The Death of American Liberty, is put out by our friends at the Libertarian Institute.
It was printed, they were the ones that did the copy editing and sent it off to Amazon to be printed. Yeah,
and but this is a collection of essays from how many years?
It's not a collection of essays. It's a new work. Most of it's new. Most of it's not been published before.
Okay.
So, some of it has been worked over again. Some of the, hell, a lot of these horror stories I've been writing about for decades. And so, I freshen it up. I tried to add more comic relief. See, if there's any trademark, I write about terrible things. Life needs comic relief.
Yes.
So, and good beer, because I think you're a beer guy, right?
Yes, good beer and gallows humor are two of my favorite things.
That's a good combination.
Yeah. And it's been out just for a couple months now.
Yeah, correct. And I was worried the book might be overexposed, but it hasn't happened yet.
It's a problem. Well, after this show, it's going to...
There you go.
I would assume that Amazon is going to get crushed with orders. And tell people where they can find your work. They obviously need to go buy your new book.
Thank you very much.
Where else?
I've done a lot the last couple of years for New York Post. They've been great to work with. I do stuff occasionally for Mises, for Libertarian Institute, for Future Freedom Foundation, some other magazines, American Conservative. Almost all the articles I repost on my blog. That's at jimbovard.com. It's one of those damn French names. You got to check the spelling twice. Yeah. So, but it's great to catch up with you because, having met you 35 or so years ago, it's great to see how you're still carrying the banner for freedom and how you're helping waking up a new generation, how you're white pilling a new generation for freedom.
You're so cool using that phrase now.
I was thinking of red pill because I was thinking of that movie. What was the Matrix?
The Matrix, yeah.
Yeah. Because I was for the first half of the interview, I was saying, well, shit, I thought it was red pill.
Yeah.
But hey, it's possible to teach an old dog a new trick.
Yeah, it happened today.
It happened today.
This is history. Thank you. We should get back together fairly soon and dig deeper into a specific issue, because I don't even think we talked about guns, but that's a whole
guns.
show.
Yeah, guns fascinate. Well, I started to say guns fascinate me, but I don't want to have a red flag raid. I'll say guns interest me.
Yeah. Don't give them any interest. Okay. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.